Yeah, we're ready to go.
Okay, great. Okay.
Okay.
Second. So let me just get this all set up, and off we go. So I appreciate the time. We're starting right on time. Fantastic. And I appreciate the opportunity, first of all, to come back to SVSS. I mean, it's been a little while, and this is the first time I'm doing this lecture not with you in person, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that. Saves the flight, but I wish I was there with you. And yes, Kyle, it's being recorded. You bet. Also, thanks to the Torrey Pines Gulls. There's a lot of people that you'll hear about in this lecture that have helped not only with the history of what we're doing, but also helping me put this together. Also, I found a lot of this information in pieces on RC groups, and it made me realize during that process how really cool RC groups is at saving our history, which is really fun. It does take a little effort to tease it out from different parts and different threads and stuff. And so we'll get to it. So again, this is about not only the International Hand Launch Glider Festival here in San Diego, celebrating our 25th year this year, but also the history of discus launch gliding. And in particular, I want to take you through a story about how hand launch gliding has changed over time to what it is today, how discus launch gliding came to be. And it's a really fun look at the technology that's happened in a very short amount of time, really, especially due to contests like this one. So back in the 1970s, many of you might remember these days when people flying RC were mainly slopers to start with in the 60s. Getting into the 70s, thermaling kind of became in vogue. And the RC equipment at that time was rather bulky, let's just say rather heavy and very bulky, very expensive too. And in the 1970s, it kind of became possible to put up gliders on winch lines and thermal. Standard class gliding, 100-inch or larger, were sort of the planes of choice of that era, mainly for winch launching and thermal contest duration. But there were some people, very brave souls, as I put here, that decided that it might be possible, even though they had these big, hunky, clunky standard class gliders, to throw them by hand just to see if they could catch a thermal at low altitude and then take it up from there. And of course, it's a really fun day when you can get a launch from hand at very low altitude, like 20 feet, with a 100-inch sailplane and get a thermal and spec out. That's a fun experience. And as people believed that became possible, even, more and more people rose to that challenge of, I wonder if I could even do that, because it doesn't seem like something you should be able to do with a Paragon or with a Grand Esprit, something pretty big and something pretty heavy to throw. There were early clubs around America, the Madison Area RC Society being one of them in Wisconsin. They had a glider day contest in August of 1978, and they had 3 different launch methods, a high start, a winch, and also hand launch. So people in the late 70s started kind of recognizing that maybe it'd be possible to do hand launch as a competition aspect of thermaling, of RC thermaling. And really the first person to do that on a rather grand scale was a gentleman by the name of David Thornburg, who is kind of regarded as the father of hand launch gliding in America, at least. He was the first to organize, that I can find, a hand launch glider contest, a real, let's just dedicate it only to hand launch gliding. And this was held in April of 1979 at Cal State Dominguez Hills near Los Angeles. Dave was the contest director, and you can see the motley crew of people down below bringing their very large aircraft to this amazing event. And really, the people that were in this contest were amazing people. They still are mainly amazing people, and really had a lot of fun in this contest, running around the field trying to throw their big planes as fast and hard as they could. Blaine Rowden run with a 110-inch Mirage, and a gentleman named Chris Adams came in 3rd place. It was the only photo I could find of an actual person that placed in the contest. You can see his plane aptly called the Soar Arm down on the left-hand side there, which is not one of the 100-inch gliders. So he was pretty smart. He made things a little smaller, maybe a little easier to throw, kind of a purpose-built glider for this contest. And you can also see Dave Thornburg kneeling for the photograph. There's several other notables that were at this contest, like Larry Jolly and Joe Wirtz and others. Really a lot of fun. Dave Thornburg not only pioneered the interest and aspect of hand launch gliding as a contest, but really understood the sort of technology it would take to build planes that could do that on a more regular basis than maybe a Paragon could. And he designed this glider, called the Sunbird in April of 1980, so 1 year after that contest. Or it was published 1 year after that contest. I think he actually flew like a prototype Sunbird in that 1979 contest. But this is a very special plane. So in 1980, it was very hard to make a 60-inch glider. This is a 54-inch glider at 13 ounces. For that equipment was really remarkable for that day. He found special Futaba equipment. So the Futaba equipment itself was under 5 ounces. The plane itself was 13, ready to fly. And he has this great quote. He said, "I can throw a Sunbird to 25 or 30 feet of altitude at most, but that's more than enough altitude to catch ground thermals anywhere in the U.S., provided the conditions are right." So at most, he's running around throwing to 30 feet and having a lot of fun. Think about what we're at today with launches to maybe 300 feet if you're a really, really, really good launcher with Discus launch, and you can see where things have gone. The Sunbird was, again, a remarkable design, not only because of what it was doing and what he was trying to do with the model, but because it was specifically built to be very light. It has, lightning holes in the tail. The whole construction is exceedingly light. The main spar is almost halfway back on the cord. Flat bottom airfoil, as you can see. It was just a very purpose-built aircraft to be light and carry the least amount of RC payload possible so that he could throw it to be 30 feet high, which was amazing in the time. And also, Dave Thornburg was fantastic at marketing. So along with my father, Larry Fogel, who was writing for Model Builder, and Bill Forey, who was writing for Model Builder, David Thornburg also wrote for Model Builder in between the two, and really popularized this concept of RC hand launch gliding. His monthly columns on RC hand launch gliding, what are people doing in that community? And since he was kind of the leader already, he was leading that community in a certain direction, especially people who were purpose designing their own gliders for this type of competition. And I tell you to look at the photos in the article I have on the right. The rightmost photo, unfortunately, is of a gentleman who's throwing his plane a little too hard, and you can see the wing is about to fold, or he's in the process of folding. And the plane on the bottom left is actually a design by Joe Wirtz. It's one of his early first gliders used for hand launch. It was a 90-inch span glider that he designed, and it says the wing loading is around 4 ounces per square foot. And with that plane, he won the first hand launch contest of 1980 of that year. So these kinds of new designs were coming out at the same time that the Class B 2-meter designs were very popular in America. And so Class A and Class B kind of took off on their own at the same time that standard class was already very popular. So smaller equipment led to smaller classes and more fun, I would say, bigger fun. And lastly, about Dave Thornburg, he has this great quote that I found. It's one of my favorite quotes in RC. And it says, "Hand launch RC has opened up a whole new world to me, a world of micro meteorology that takes place in the invisible air around us every minute, a world of miniature highs and lows, cold fronts and warm that sweep and dance across flying fields no larger than a baseball diamond." And that is exactly what we do even today. You look for thermals across the field, and it's not that far from you. We're really exploring meteorology on a very small scale with very small equipment, and he was doing it at 30 feet. Maybe we're a little higher than that today. But it was really because of his pioneering work and thought and construction and helping that grow that led to the momentum that led to what we have today, and really converted people to saying you don't have to launch with a winch or a high start. You can launch by your hand and still have a lot of fun. That was a brand new thing in the 1970s and 80s. To commemorate his fantastic contribution, they had a nice contest called the Old Buzzard's Sunbird Classic. He was nicknamed Old Buzzard. They had a classic for him in February of 2000. A lot of the folks that were at that first 1979 hand launch contest came out to Arizona to thank him. You can see on the right a picture of Joe Wirtz holding a photo of the 1979 and Dave Thornburg pointing out Joe Wirtz in the photo. And on the left is a photo of Dave Thornburg throwing a Sunbird for fun in that contest. Just a nice way to commemorate his wonderful achievements and contributions to our sport. But I do want to mention that there were other people thinking a very similar way. There was a gentleman named Bob Simon here in the Torrey Pines Gulls in the 1980s. I don't have a photo of him. I wish I did. But he was making very, very small scale planes on the order of 40-inch models to slope at Torrey Pines in the 1980s. And of course, also there was a gentleman named Dick Vader from Orange County, no relation to Darth, who came out of the slope soaring scene in South Bay in Orange County. Slope soaring and then trying to convert to thermal soaring, but mainly stuck on slope soaring. And also is very interested in small scale stuff. How can I take the smallest equipment and make the smallest product possible? And one of his designs in the early 1980s was this plane called the Skywalker, because Star Wars had just come out and his name was Vader. Makes sense. It was a 50-inch pod with a all wood wing, solid wood wing, sanded down to the airfoil shape, under cambered. A lot of fun. My father and I had one of these and enjoyed flying that. I still got it. A lot of fun to fly the Skywalker. But again, mainly a sloped bird, not made for thermaling. It could thermal, but it was difficult to thermal it. By the 1980s, because of the rise of interest in Class A and Class B, manufacturers caught on, of course, and they wanted to serve that community, but with new products and with new radio equipment that could fit these smaller products. So as that radio gear became smaller and lighter and hopefully more reliable, although not all the time, people started manufacturing things. So, just looking at Joe Breedy's products here that are pictured on this page, the Tercel, the Castaway, and the Flinger, all three were meant for what was called grenade launch, either javelin launch, like you launch a javelin, or hopefully holding your arm straight and doing a grenade launch style effort. Mainly balsa wood built up gliders like you would take a standard type of approach to building. Nothing too complex, mostly rudder elevator only. And quite interestingly, there were a lot of these designs that came out in the early 1980s. On the left, I have a whole list of them, and I'll show you some photos of them. And by the time we got to the 1990s, those designs had started to change. And part of my presentation today will be to take you through that progression of how things have changed and maybe why, and looking back at that technology change. But I want to point out, there's too many planes to list, and there's too many wonderful people that made these planes, but I wanted to list some of them. I also want to point you to this fantastic resource that's available online, this field guide to modeling. They have lots and lots and lots of different gliders with their specs, with photos. It helped me a lot for this presentation and looking for that technology that over time. Fun resource, just type in fieldguidetomodeling.com and you'll find your way. A lot of fun. What did that transition look like? I'm going to focus in on it more as we go through tonight, but starting off on the left with Larry Jolly's Flinger on the upper left. Again, you can see in the early 80s, it was definitely polyhedral, rudder elevator only to keep the weight down because we can't have more than 2 turbos or else we're just adding weight. Another great plane in this class was the Gnome, the 2-meter Gnome, again, or the mini Gnome. That's the early 1980s on the left-hand side. In the middle, we have the Dodgson Orbiter, which was one of the first gliders to incorporate this carbon fiber boom to keep the weight down, and also incorporate ailerons instead of the polyhedral. So we're trying to get a little bit more efficient rudder, elevator, and ailerons. There was also the Charlie Richardson Climax, which was a very popular design locally here in San Diego in the 1980s. He made a different series of them, some with polyhedral, some with ailerons. But by the late 1980s, early 1990s, things changed. And people were now building their own models rather than from kits and designing their own things and designing them out of blue foam or white foam, fiberglassing their own kits, coming up with their own designs. On the upper left, we have the Apogee from Mark Drela, who I'll talk about in just a second. On the bottom, we have the Encore, it's a maple leaf gliders design. And I'll talk about the history of those too, because you can see the progression, this rapid progression from polyhedral kits you can build that are like a standard kind of way of getting into RC to making things on your own, and what's the right airfoil to use, and how do I incorporate all this stuff. And if you look on the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that Encore has full, it's a flapper on it. It's got flaps in the inboard, it's got ailerons, it's got rudder. It's an open class ship at 60-inch, which was remarkable for that time. One of the first ships to do that. So let's look at that. What allowed that to happen? And one of the things that allowed that to happen was this fantastic gentleman named Dr. Drela, who's currently in M.I.T. At the time, in the late 80s, he was working at Princeton, getting his degree from the University of Illinois, but working at Princeton, testing model airplanes, model sailplanes in particular, different airfoils for model airplane in a wind tunnel to understand their drag and understand their lift. 60 different models with 130 different airfoils tested in the wind tunnel. So really, for the first time, the modeling community had a database of fantastic information about model airplane airfoils that led to the SD-7037, which was so popular in the late 80s and early 90s through the 90s. It led to publications by Dr. Drela and his team about those airfoils. It also led to this very fantastic program called X-Foil that was specifically designed for people designing at low Reynolds numbers like the model aircraft community. And he kept doing this. He's been doing this ever since. Other series of airfoils, refining those techniques. In the 1990s, he came up with the AG airfoil series and the HT airfoil series for tails that were even better than the SD airfoils from the late 80s. That effort really helped expand not only competition thermal duration for standard class, but allowed people to think about, hey, I've got the right airfoil now for my smaller stuff. How can I build things using X-foil and see what it's going to look like, and then go build it with a foam cutter and make my own plane? Really a lot of fun, and that improved performance tremendously. Dr. Drela came out of the free flight community to help the RC community, got very interested in the RC community, and you'll see him in this photo on the right wearing a Torrey Pines Gulls t-shirt from one of our hand launch glider festivals. So he became instantly interested in what's going on in the hand launch community, specifically to apply what he had learned to our fun hobby. And it's because of him we have a lot of growth in that time. So during that whole effort, a lot of California was involved. I've mentioned already that the first contest in America for this that was really dedicated to hand launch was here in Southern California. Of course, people in Northern California were doing this too. But the scene was very popular here in the 80s going into the 90s, especially around this Class A 60-inch wingspan. AMA defined, the soaring board defined Class A to be 60-inch or less and Class B to be above 60-inch to 2-meter. And with those two competition categories defined, competition began. And one of the first hand launch glider contests that was here in San Diego, specifically for that Class A contest size, was in 1991, the Inland Soaring Society here in Riverside. That was a very popular meet, and the members of the Torrey Pines Gulls took notice of that. We followed with our own event here in San Diego in 91, at the end of 91, and that was also very popular. And there was a gentleman here in our club, Steve Stricklet, very inventive gentleman, who came up with the idea of saying, well, you know, we do large 2-day contests at Visalia and other things for standard class. Why don't we have a large 2-day meet for hand launch? It's kind of, we drive all this way, you want to fly for 2 days, how come we don't do this? The club thought that was a great idea, but the rules, the tasks, how do you actually run this kind of contest to keep it fun for 2 days? That all is still undetermined. No one really understood how to do that. So it took a couple of years to really understand what it is that Steve was asking and how it is it could be done. The club president at the time was John McNeil. He said, this is a great idea. We should definitely do this. We're going to encourage the sport and encourage TPZ's position in the sport. And we could be the first to do a 2-day hand launch glider contest in the world. And that's the case. So the International Hand Launch Glider Festival was the first of its kind, and I think became a central place for this new technology to be tested in the competition setting internationally before there really even was much international cohesion. That contest coming out was the hard work of many local club members, more than I've listed here. But I just wanted to make sure I did list a few, mainly the Condon family, John McNeil, of course. Paul Natan, who you may have known from his fabulous videos, was a member of the club at the time, really did a lot for marketing for our thing. Charlie Richardson, who I've mentioned, with the Climax. There was one member, though, in particular, who really took this idea and ran with it, and that was a gentleman named Ron Shark, who's currently in Texas. He volunteered to be the MC, the master of ceremonies, the organizer of all this, not necessarily the contest director, but the guy that would make sure every year it would happen. And especially for the first few years that are so critical to get something like this off the ground, he made it happen. And without that leadership, I don't know if it would have taken root as quickly as it did. So it was a great thing he did. And again, as I mentioned, early on, we really didn't know what we were doing. We were coming up with tasks. We were making them up for the contest. It was, let's invent something today to see if it works this month and try it out. And so during the monthly club contest between the first idea in 1992 and late 1993, we had monthly contests. The emphasis was on fun, but we tried to break down the contest into 10-minute rounds and come up with tasks that would say, for instance, you have 5 flights in that 10-minute round. Each flight should be 2 minutes duration maximum, but you don't have more than 6 launches. Now, today, that is actually one of the tasks we still fly in Discus launch. Today, you have only 5 flights. There's not 6 launches. You'll have only 5 flights. Whoops. Hang on just a second. My lights went on. Hang on. That was interesting. Apologies for that. I'm back. Sorry. So we try to come up with these rounds, these ideas. And another one was, because it was so hard to run around the field trying to catch thermals, what's the longest flight you can have with no limit on the number of launches that are possible in that round? You could just run around and throw as many times as possible to get the longest flight. And it might be a matter of just seconds, but people were really running around the field like crazy, trying to throw, where's the thermal I'm going to run to it, because I can't throw that far and I can't throw that high. I have to run to chase the thermal to get to it, to throw into it. A lot of fun. That led to a lot of different types of tasks that we kept as a list for the contest. And even for some contests, the contest director would say, I'm not going to announce the tasks ahead of time. I'm going to get to the field today, and this is what we're going to fly today. And we just announce the task as the contest is being flown. Okay, this is the next task, go out and do it. And that made it really fun, exciting, and we were trying new things because no one had done this thing before. The first International Hand Launch Glider Festival was in October of 1994, again, 2 days. We arranged it as a first day of 10 rounds, so that's a lot of throwing, and then three fly-off rounds after that. And the scores for your 10 rounds would carry into the fly-off rounds for the top 10 competitors. There were 26 people that showed up. All of them were from America, so not exactly international yet. And the top 3 were Joe Wirtz, Arthur Markevitz, and Gordon Jennings. And Joe, of course, had been doing this for a long time. He'd been doing it since the first 1979 contest. So no doubt a fantastic pilot like Joe would place well. But he came out of that saying, this is the best hand launch contest I've ever flown in. It was a lot of fun. And everyone said, what? This is an amazing event. These are really fun things. I've never done this before. We've got to do this again. And it almost kind of was self-fulfilling because it was so fun. But think back to the 1990s. So the club was not just starting. We're almost ready to celebrate our 50th year as a club. So we've been around for a while. But you have to think about it. Here's these tasks. How do you relay the time of the tasks to the competitors? In the beginning, that wasn't really clear. So the tasks were mainly around a timer timing the tasks rather than some audio telling you how you're doing in the tasks and how much time is left. So in 1 year, we realized we had to have a PA system that was sending out some kind of programmed audio. So a gentleman named Don Richmond, who was a member of the club, made an electronic scoring system with software that could program, here's the task. By 1996, we had sponsorship from Airtronics. We marketed the heck out of this contest through this new thing called email to try to get the international team to know we were doing this. And that worked. So in just the first 2 years, it led to international interest. We had 75 pilots in the 1996 contest, 8 states, 3 international, 3 nations around the world. And that generated more than the expected reward. We ended up with a surplus of $1,600. And we donated that as a club to the local child abuse center because it was the right thing to do. We were not expecting that much reward, and it was just a way to give back. Joe Wirtz had won the first 3 contests. It wasn't until 1997 that someone else won the contest. Of course, it was Daryl Perkins, who was also a very, very fantastic pilot. And in 1998, we had a website. This was amazing at the time. Wow, we have the internet. We can reach out to the international community even more. And we started to have 3 different age groups for the contest rather than just open class. It was junior open and a class called Bald Eagle for the times they're balding. A lot of fun. Everything, keeping it fun. And in 1999, we had 81 pilots, again, a broader diversity of countries learning what we were trying to do and wanting to come to be a part of that team. And it was the first year that we really said, hey, we're going to enforce this maximum 60-inch or 1.5-meter wingspan. You have to come and verify that this is the case. So while I take you through this journey, I want to go back and look at the designs because they have changed with time. And I'll take the one on the right first. So Tom Clarkson was a member here in the Torrey Pines Gulls, very interested in building his own stuff. He was a thermal duration pilot wanting to get into hand launch. He built this thing called the Poway Pirate because our contest was held in Poway, California. Again, all foam core cut, his own design, his own airfoils based off of Drela's airfoils, carbon boom, carbon pod, a very early carbon everything kind of approach for the fuselage, versus the Maple Leaf on the left, which is still polyhedral. Even as late as 1998, still can be bought as a polyhedral aircraft. But now all Kevlar is being as light, as strong as possible, rather than the carbon. So again, very different approaches, a different kind of style than what we have today. So in the late 1990s, things got even more interesting because the launching methods changed. And I spent a lot of time on RC groups trying to research this, and I hope I have it right. If there's anyone out there that thinks it's maybe not right, I'd love to learn more. Please let me know, email me, and let me know how to get it correct. But first thing started off with what was called sidearm launching, SAL. And there was a gentleman named Harold Block in Seattle. He was an aircraft designer. He also was working on very, very lightweight RFD aircraft. It was his passion. He was developing foam core wing, very swept aircraft, aileron elevator control. He made one called the micro, small, with a kite spar, carbon kite spar for a boom. And that had very poor thermaling performance, but it could be launched sidearm. You grab onto the wingtip with your fingers pinching, and you just throw it sidearm. It's not a discus launch. It's just, I'm going to just throw it sidearm. A gentleman named Phil Pearson suggested adding a fin below the rudder to reduce the torque and also yaw issues with having the rudder just be above the boom. And so Harold added that sub fin, modified the micro, and he called that a thing called the tactical air. The idea was that the launch would be much straighter off the sidearm throw. But you had to be very tactical about how you're throwing this thing. This was a small aircraft. It was 44 inches span. And the idea is you had to run around, watch where the other competitors are in the thermal, and then throw your plane into that thermal and try to get on top of them. Because it was so small, it didn't have really good legs. It couldn't really find its own thermals very well, and you're not going to throw it all that high. So it was tactical in the way you used it. And Phil Pearson flew that at the hand launch in 1997 to 16th place. So already trying to do sidearm launch around all the Javelin launchers. The next version of that was called the Glass Air because it was into fiberglass. And a gentleman, Adam Weston, flew that at the 1999 Hand Launch Fighter Festival. And so you could kind of see that things were changing in the launch method. People were trying to explore the launch method as a way of improving performance. If I can launch higher than everyone else, that's a really big bonus. Here's a picture of that tactical air. You can see the small wingspan of it on the left-hand side and a close-up view of it on the right. Again, very home-built looking thing, and worked well for sidearm launch. But of course, a turning point for not only the Hand Launch Fighter Festival, but for the entire community was discus launching. That happened in 1999 and 2000. The International Contest in 2000 was actually the first international hand launch meet to make use of what was now the new provisional FAI rules for this type of flying. So enough of the international community had come to see what we were doing that they took those ideas back to other nations and said, wow, this is a lot of fun. And FAI got together with those groups of people to take the rules we've helped invent and other rules around the world and make provisional rules for what was a new class called F3K. Again, those are largely patterned off of the tasks we invented even prior back to our monthly contest before the International had been born. But in 1999 and 2000, these gentlemen from Seattle came down. They had already explored a lot of this up in Seattle and had sort of come up with the discus launch approach. I'll take you through that in just a second. So Harold Block, Phil Pearson, Dick Barker, and your own Greg Norsworthy really helped introduce that to this community. And it was very clear after that introduction that discus launch was the way to go. So Dick Barker was really the one who kind of helped pioneer that aspect of it, that spin and throw as a discus launcher. He was another Seattle-based engineer, again, also bagging his own foam wings for javelin launch throw. And he was previously in high school as a discus thrower. So very natural for him to say, what are we doing with this javelin launch stuff? I think I could throw it higher with discus. He built a 1.5 meter polyhedral aircraft, specifically with a small tab at the end to help throw with a spin. That was just spin and throw. And on one of those efforts, he tried a 360 spin and threw it by holding onto the tip, and that actually worked really well, far better than people were expecting, and it got a lot of oohs and ahs from the guys up in Seattle. He specifically designed this aircraft called the Uplink with a fiberglass pod and a carbon boom for that kind of discus launching approach, and that's the kind of effort that he brought back to Poway for our contest and wowed the community here, that was for sure. I do want to mention, though, that there's this other gentleman, Alniz, I think it is, I'm not sure I know how to pronounce his last name well, up in your area in Pacifica, who was independently developing discus launch even earlier. So this was 1996. There was a mention of it in RC Soaring Digest at that time in October. Just trying at his field up in Pacifica, trying to throw a hand launch glider by the spin and throw kind of technique. Very similar to what they were inventing up in Seattle. And you can see in the diagram there's a tip peg, just like we would use today. A lot of fun. So I just want to mention, he wasn't the one who helped publicize it, but there's another gentleman up your way doing it. But really, Dick was the one who's the father of that kind of method and helped popularize it by taking it to contests and showing other people how to do it. And because of that, really the field changed very dramatically. So that was at the same time when the Encore sailplane pictured on the left, this very flat airfoil aileron and flap designed javelin launched aircraft, which was winning the contest, was modified by Phil Pearson and Joe Wirt and also sold to the community through Maple Leaf Design as the Encore with the discus throw in mind. And you can see the peg on the aircraft in the middle. This was a really fantastic aircraft. It won the championships here for 4 years in a row. A great aircraft, all based on that discus launch approach. And again, when discus launch came in 1999 to 2000, essentially within 1 year, the entire field of competitors at the International Glider Contest had flipped from javelin launch to discus launch. That was a brand new thing. People necessarily didn't know the technique very well. People were trying new techniques. A lot of people were adding small gyros to their aircraft to help the stabilization on the launch, to keep it going straight, because the designs they were coming up with weren't really optimized yet for that kind of launch. Neither was the RC technology. But by the 10th International Glider Contest in 2002, again, lots of design of different aircraft now to withstand those launch forces as people were getting better at the discus launch without blowing up their aircraft on launch. And there were increasing numbers of flaperon designs, flat aircraft rather than polyhedral, with carbon spars in the wing to keep the wing from folding on the launch. And just increasing sophistication as they kept making use of these new Drela airfoils and X-foil code to design increasingly better things. So it was the community taking this idea of discus launch and exploring it as a group with the best airfoils that Drela could come out with and the best kind of foam cutting technology we could get. That led to some fun. It led to an increased rivalry at the International Hand Launch Glider Festival between the East and the West, because Joe Wirt had still been winning a lot of these contests. Folks in the West had been winning. And it wasn't until Oleg Golibadov in 2003 beat Joe by 13 points out of 12,000 points in the contest to win that someone from the East had won. And that really kind of set this East-West rivalry for the contest. By 2004, so again, just within like 3-4 years of discus launching, roughly half the competitors were flying their own designs, which was still amazing, and half were flying purchasable aircraft like an Encore or a Vandal or a Super G. Super G was still a kit, but you could, basically things you could buy but were almost built for you as a part of the contest. And we were encouraging that kind of launching method. We were helping people get their form correct by having discus launch clinics. So on the 2005 edition, we had a launch clinic the day before to make sure everyone's launching safely. And also thinking about the fact when you spin and throw, you should look ahead to know where you're throwing so you don't try to be like a missile and take someone out on the way up. And again, back to these designs, this is a very critical time in the design to win this contest. And we went rapidly from great planes like the Monarch, great Javelin launch aircraft. I still have one and enjoy it. There was a series of those made by Don Stackhouse, great plane. Right away to a thing like the Super G, designed by Mark Drela to handle discus launching, to have the right airfoil, to be carbon, to be strong, to be lightweight, and do that well. And within 3 years, rapid transition of design and performance. There were also local modelers like Arthur Markevitz here in the Torrey Pines Gulls, again, just trying his own designs for discus launch. There was Jerry Cranock to come up with the Photon 1 and Photon 2, very popular polyhedral launch, discus launch style, making some very lightweight design, and a carbon Kevlar D2. And Phil Barnes, a very popular design called the Logic, or the Logic Pro, Logic P, that had an extended tail boom, exceedingly small tail, less drag back there, less weight back there, a lot of weight in the wing for strength. Used the 70-80 airfoil, and again, lighter weight going to higher launches. It was all about the launches, because people realized the higher you can launch, the longer you're going to stay up, and the longer you're going to compete. And part of the contest then became not just chasing the thermals around by running to them, but by launching as high as possible and flying to them. And that radically changed the way people behaved in the contest. Lastly, just to mention some other popular designs that were in the sort of kit build era. The DL60 and the XT4, very popular planes, very similar to what Drela was doing with the Super G. But again, strong, light, carbon, Kevlar, no longer polyhedral, all flapper-on kind of design within 4 years of discus launch. So FAI took very great interest in F3K. Again, they introduced the provisional rules in 1999. Some of those tasks made lots of sense for javelin throwing, and some of them made no sense for discus launch, because some of the tasks had like a 1 minute max duration. And if you do discus launch well enough, you're definitely going to make that for sure. So they no longer made sense. So the community kind of went through and said, wow, we've made these great rules. We've got to go through and parse them to see how we're flying them in different areas, and let's make them work for the aircraft we're flying. There were differences in the way that those rules were used here locally in California versus how they were flown in Europe. Things like what's the position of the model if it lands inbounds or out of bounds, things of that nature that were quickly pulled together to form a community around F3K and have this thing be taking off for the future. And that was a great time, again, for the sport that came out of what we built, largely out of what we built, then to the international community, then collected again by the community to make the rules correct. Again, it took a long time for a TPGer, a Torrey Pines Gulls member, to win the International Hand Launch Fighter Festival. That happened for the first time in 2006. Paul Anderson came in first, Joe Wirtz was second. Joe Wirtz was still doing very well at this time. We were very proud of Paul, still are very proud of Paul for that. And we also had, since launching was so important, in 2007 we added an International Hand Launch Altitude Challenge before the meet, and Oleg won that with a launch of 208 feet. And by that time, we're close to our 15th contest. We finally made use of the approved F3K rules. So it was the first international meet to make use of those rules. It was the 15th International Hand Launch Fighter Festival. And again, bringing people together by saying, let's take these new rules, people from the East Coast or from the West Coast, let's get together and find out what tasks are going to be fun to fly in San Diego, really make it fun for everyone. And that was a great building time for the community. We moved the event from October to July to April to deconflict with other DLG events as this community grew. And again, more technology changes. We all changed from 72 megahertz to 2.4 gigahertz. A great change in the community, hopefully more reliable technology. We also enjoyed things like the post-practice social on Friday night at the Hamburger Factory. We had Mexican siestas and some of these things. All you can eat pizza. You know, just fun time with a little bit of beer around and having a good time with friends. And during that time, things kept changing. So I want to mention, again, two other designs. One on the right first, around Kalska coming up with the Lighthawk. The Lighthawk was a very popular design, kind of based off the Super G models, but as a kit, it was easy to make. From RC groups, you could get parts and lots of thoughts about how to build it. That was a very popular design. And also, Roland Sommer, who had a long history of design from Germany, mainly in scale aircraft, scale models, in 2009 came out with a concept, a very well-known discus launch glider that still exists today, and I think the 5th version now, of almost 10 years of design off of his work. That was one of the first low-wing discus launch gliders. And lastly, just to bring you up to the last present speed. Again, we've been doing this as we take the proceeds, we turn around the proceeds to pay off the event, but then also the excess either typically goes to a local charity or more lately has been going back to the USA F3K team. So ever since the F3K rules have been in place and there's been a world championship for discus launch, DPG has been donating a lot of money out of this contest back to that team. We've had the pleasure of having lots of people from around the world come and enjoy it with us. And again, I want to mention Joe Wirtz again. The 10th time he won it was last year, 2017. 10 times he's won this contest. And we had a fantastic contest last year. We were able to donate $5,000 to the USA F3K team. Most of anyone other than AMA donating a financial assistance back to that team to keep that team going well. We have a great silent auction as a part of the contest. People bid and buy items at lower cost, lower than expected cost, but all that proceeds goes to that team drive. So just to review the champions, you see a lot of Joe Wirtz's name, fantastic pilot. The only other person to win it 3 times was Phil Barnes in the mid-2000s. Daryl Perkins has won it twice. Who else am I forgetting? Oleg's won it twice. But now we're in a period where it seems like it's up for grabs, and there's more talent. Every time I go out there, it's amazing to watch the talent that's on the field, especially at the International Glider Contest. We have our monthly contest too, and again, because Torrey Pines Gulls are Torrey Pines Gulls, pretty much every monthly contest, there's some really good competition going on too. The caliber here is very high. So I want to make sure that you are aware of the 25th anniversary of this event. It's going to be a fantastic event. Coming up soon in April, late April. We have a 2-day event, as I mentioned before. It's the Saturday and Sunday. There'll be contest rounds all day on the Saturday. It typically starts around 9 o'clock and goes till probably about 4 or 5 o'clock. And believe me, your arm is tired by the end of that day. We have Subway sandwiches for lunch. We have the large auction typically during the lunchtime. And then there's a pizza night either on the field or at a local pizza place. And then Sunday, more rounds in the morning to find out who's the winner, and then the fly-offs in addition to that. And those fly-off rounds are spectacular to watch. It's the best in the world launching. I've never seen people launch as high as it is at the International Glider Festival. It's a fun thing to do. This year in particular, we're going to do some fun stuff on the Friday before the contest. We're not exactly sure what that's going to be yet. The idea is to go back to some of the earliest tasks for the International Hand Launch Glider Festival and recreate them. Maybe even only recreate them with javelin launch. And that would be a kind of a fun thing. Not going to score as a part of the contest, just for fun. But there will be a Mexican taco night in the order of the history of this event, just to cap that off. And Mike Seid, who's been doing this for a very long time and actually has also won the contest, is our contest director. So I encourage you to come down, be a part of this, and enjoy the field and the camaraderie of this event. It's really a special event, not only because of the great evening activities, but the stuff that happens on the day. And you can see Mike Smith and Mike Seid there on the bottom left, 2 fantastic competitors that have really kept the drive going and the team going for the international contest and keeping this as a contest for locally, but also keeping it going for the international community. So I want to direct you to our website. It's this International Hand Launch Glider Festival.org. And also, I want to thank a gentleman named Chuck Norris, who I hope is on the line. I'm not sure if he is or not yet, but Chuck is the one doing that website. And over time, I've collected a lot of information on the history, the kind of information I just gave to you, but we've now generated a subdirectory of that website that has all the history year by year with either reports that were in our CSD or reports in our own newsletter or YouTube videos or whatever we could find. And you can go through year by year, and it's really fun to see all the different methods, the videos of the launching, the great video by Paul Natan in the 2000 time frame that he has online and is a part of that website that allows you to see discus launching for the first time and what it was like back then. It's a really fun thing. I also encourage you, if you're interested, to register on F3X Vault. I believe we have 64 or 65 people registered. We've only been up on that vault for about 2 weeks now. So I'm expecting hopefully we get to close to 80 or 90 people. and I think we have something on the order of 5 or 6 countries represented already. So with that, I want to thank you again. I appreciate the opportunity, as always, to speak to you. I wish I was there in person. Hopefully I'll be there in person next time, and hopefully this virtual meeting worked, and hopefully you have some questions for me. So I open it up to questions either online or in the audience back in South Bay. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. Can I? Okay, this is Kyle. Can I ask a quick one?
Absolutely, Kyle. Please do.
So, what do you think are going to be the trends in your festival? Like, what kind of gliders do you think you'll see in the future? And is it gaining popularity, lessening popularity, more international, less international? You know, what do you just guess is going to be?
Great question, Kyle. So, of course, I'm very concerned to one degree because I get a little worried that people are priced out by the stuff that's going on right now. If you want to really compete at the serious level, you're putting a lot of money into your plane. It comes pre-built. You're putting a lot of money in your radio, and you're getting the best of the best. That makes sense. It's a contest. But I do wish that there was a way of having that same kind of competitive aspect for low cost. So maybe it is that we think about reducing the span. So there's a 1 meter class that's now coming up. There's more talk about it on RC groups. There are 1 meter aircraft like the Hawk that are out there for less money than you would buy a Snipe or something else that's competitive. Still is interesting, still is fun. It might not get the same launch height as a Snipe, but it still is fun to fly. So I'm hopeful that maybe by going to a smaller wingspan, we can reduce the overall cost, bring in new people, and then have them go to the bigger class. I'm also a little disconcerted that there isn't as much home building as there was in the past. I know you have the Pickle up there, and there's people down here that are building planes on their own, which is good. I'd love to see more of that sort of home-built version, because that ends up hopefully being cheaper. It sure is a lot of fun. But I think also what you've seen in the technology is a reflection of a few things. It's a reflection of the equipment getting smaller with time. So I don't expect that to change. I think that the equipment will still get smaller. We're already very small and very good, which is fantastic. Compared to what it was in the 70s, we're amazing. This is kind of a dream. The other thing that could change is the rules. So if maybe we have altitude limited throws, that might be interesting. So you can't launch higher than a certain altitude ceiling. And then it becomes more about a contest of who really does fly the best rather than launch the best. I think there's ways we could think about those kind of concepts. I do, again, worry about this a lot because I do also teach for fun at San Diego State College here in the University in San Diego. I have a class in aerospace engineering that I enjoy teaching in the fall, and there's 160 students that I have in that class. The freshman year aerospace engineering course. And as part of my course, I have them build free flight rubber band powered model airplanes. But I'd love for them to build discus launch gliders and get into RC discus launch. It's just too expensive. So if we can find a way to get the inexpensive, cheap, kit-built, high-performance aircraft, I think that would be a really great thing for this community and bring youth back in. Hope that answered the question. Are there questions at South Bay? You guys are still muted.
Go ahead. Does the Torrey Pines Glider Club have an outreach education group that can introduce these discus launch gliders to elementary, high school, and universities?
Yeah, great.
That would bring in more younger people who can keep this sport active for a long time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if you can mute again, I'll answer if you can just mute the line briefly. Perfect, thank you. And we'll come back and get another question. Let me not do that. But let me have to answer this question. The question again was, is there outreach locally in the Torrey Pines Gulls to bring in youth, high school, college, university level? I firmly believe that's the right thing to be doing. We are doing that in 2 different ways. One, we have monthly contests here at the Poway Field where the international contest is held. Those monthly contests are actually designed to be clinics. So we call them a contest. We call them a contest/clinic. It actually is more about learning. So there are lots of newbies that come to those kind of contests. It's a fun environment. It's still a contest, yes, Some of the people that come are very competitive and are doing their quick turns at 1 second intervals, and they're really, really good. But moreover, it's people that are just learning. How do I do a discus launch? And what are my steps that I make? And how do I not blow up my plane when I'm launching? How do I catch a plane? How do I throw it? How do I fly it? And we help. So there's experts that come to help those newbies learn those techniques and do that on a monthly basis and time for each other. And we're very inspirational that way, trying to get people involved. And it is working. People are coming and joining and being interested by it. The other aspect is through my teaching at the university, I do bring in students. I've been very fortunate to have 2 students in mind. One, John Blasky, who has competed in the International Hand Launch Glider Festival and competes here locally. Another gentleman named John Garber, who you might have heard about. He's now doing very well in AILS competition. He won the AILS contest nationally last year, so already experienced RCer. He's a second-year student at San Diego State, who's now bringing discus launch gliding through our club and our monthly contest to other students at San Diego State. And they're thinking about having a new club there and all that kind of stuff. It's the right way to do it. I would love to have more time for outreach at high school. I think high school might be a little young, but of course there are already programs that are like the physics contests that are a nation contest for indoor free flight gliding. It sure would be great to see indoor discus launch kind of gliding, or at least get kids involved in that kind of launch. So that's, I think, the only answer I have for you. We are trying our best. I wish we could do more. I wish there was more time to do more. I think that is exactly the right thing to do, or even putting it in programming for a physics class to say, let's go build a glider as a class. I think that'd be fun. Now, there was a question that popped up, and forgive me, I didn't get it. I'm going to go to the chat thing and see if I can. Do I see a future for 1 meter discus launch gliders? From John. I absolutely do. I mentioned that earlier. Yes, I think that's probably a very good way of bringing in people at a lower cost per volume, because it just gets so expensive with the snipes and all the rest of it. And the hawks are certainly definitely cheaper. So that is exactly what we're thinking of doing for the San Diego State group, is get those kids in, have them learn how to throw a snipe, learn how to throw a bigger one, but get them introduced at the hawk 1 meter level, get them hooked, and then and hopefully graduate. And when they graduate to something bigger, that hawk hopefully goes to another student that brings them in. Hopefully they don't all get crashed right away. We can try to keep them around a while. Other questions from South Bay?
I have a question. And do you have a suggestion for a plane to start, a DLG for starting to introduce to newbies?
Yeah, I get that a lot actually, and I've seen people show up with the like the LaBelle, the foam discus launch glider from Horizon Hobby. It's a great plane. There's nothing against it. It's a little difficult to compete with against the even the 1 meter carbon fiber ones or the snipes of the world. You get to a contest and it feels a little demoralizing to only be able to throw it 40, 50 feet, and someone else is going 200 feet. It's like, wow, okay. It is a good way to learn how to fly. It's foam, it's easy to repair. It gets you the method of how to do the discus launch easily, but competitively, maybe not there. So I do think that getting something like a hawk is a good approach. There's also, forgive me, I'm spacing on the name. There are other kits that are available that are far less expensive than a snipe. Kits internationally on the order of, let's say, $300 to $400 that are in the 1.5 meter class that are online. Still very good. Maybe not at the same level as something competitive. I got to tell you though, I've been doing this for a while, and I started out about 10 years ago or so doing this launch, kind of on my own. I was a little bit afraid to go fly in a contest because I didn't want to make a fool out of myself, and I didn't know what I was doing. So I was kind of on my own doing these things, and I found out now that I am competing and doing okay, is that you pick up a lot of bad habits when you're doing things on your own, especially with your form. And really, form is everything in the throw. I've got the flying down because I've done that in my life. I understand that part, but the throwing thing is really important. And I went through a gradation of planes thinking that I could get better and better by just buying better planes. And that helped to some degree, but it really was mostly about my form. And it took me going back and having other people help me and looking at a lot of launch videos, and the local people here are very helpful to say, no, Gary, this is what you need to do, change your form this way. And I finally got my form well. And I think that that's almost a bigger part of my throw than my playing. to get to the height where I need to be. I hope I answered the question. Are there other questions?
Thank you for putting all this on. This is great.
Thank you.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. And I did have one question back for you guys in South Bay. Is Greg Northworthy there right now?
No. He moved to Florida. He's in Florida.
I was hoping he might be able to help with the timeline on that Discus launch thing, because I know he was involved when he was here at the International Hand Launch Festival. He was one of the first competitors to bring that in. I thought that was great. So, again, I want to thank you all. I appreciate it. I hope this worked out for you, and we might be able to do this again, and it was clear. Yeah. And I'd love to get the response back through Kyle or through everyone at South Bay how this works, because I do hope that this kind of virtual meeting thing can bring more interest in what you are doing, and I hope it can also expand your audience locally. So let's try to keep that going.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
All right. I'll close. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.